Naso. So, right on schedule. This afternoon we turn to the third of the four greats, Mahamudrā. And I would call it empathetic joy, except it's not. Mudita, as I mentioned earlier, does simply mean joy, delight. In the context of the four immeasurables, it clearly has an empathetic quality to it, so it's often called sympathetic joy, empathetic. I think it's a bit closer, but they're both fine. But now, as we know in this series, and I'm starting from great compassion, and then great Mahamaitri, great loving kindness, and then great joy, and we'll culminate, of course, tomorrow with the great equanimity. Each of these starts out with a question, which is then really for reflection. It's not a self-answering question. It's actually, each one is a very deep question. And then it moves from there to an aspiration, from the aspiration to an intention, and then culminating then in a supplication that one can carry through with the intention, right? So the format's the same for each of the four. But the content's different, and it's like different facets of a single diamond. But the liturgy here, the phrasing, I think for this one is quite exceptionally rich and precise. The earlier ones, may all beings find happiness and the cause of happiness, very straightforward. This one is subtle. And so in Tibetan it goes, it's longer. And the translation for that, which again I sent to Sangye and Claudio yesterday, so it should be up soon, for all four of these, so you can see it in English. But the English translation here is, why couldn't all sentient beings never be parted from sublime happiness, free of suffering? So it put in a lot, that was a short phrase, but a lot was put in there. So the why couldn't, that's the kind of the question that we've encountered before. But never be parted from, mindel means never be parted, never separated from. It's an interesting phrase. Not, why couldn't they achieve it or realize it, or one day, why not? But why couldn't they never be parted from? And then what type of dewa? Dewa is sukha, so well-being, or happiness. But it's dambe dewa, sat sukha. And the damba has a quality of sacred, so sacred well-being, or sublime is also very good. In some contexts it means ultimate. Dundam demba. So sublime is very nice. Sacred is also true. It's also ultimate. So why couldn't all sentient beings never be parted from, let's say, sublime, sat, sukha, sublime happiness? And then dunga mepa means devoid of, empty of, not without any suffering. The phrasing is interesting, isn't it? Never be parted from. We generally think of being parted from something that we've actually been with at some point, right? I don't think of never being parted from Bolivia. I've never been there. Once I've been there, I might wish, may I never be parted. If I really felt at home there, I might never want to might never want to leave. But never be parted from suggested already some familiarity, right? And so how might we understand that? Some sublime dimension of well-being that is devoid of happiness. And then of course we can envision, what this means is, may each one, realize ultimate reality and never be parted from the bliss, let's say of direct realization of emptiness. When you have a direct realization of emptiness, as in the case of an Arya Bodhisattva, or let's say a Vidyadhara with direct unmediated realization of pristine awareness, Rigpa. Now that's immutable bliss. That's the real thing. Okay? This is way beyond the bliss of the mere substrate consciousness, which is conditioned within time and so forth. Now the bliss of Rigpa is immutable bliss, or for the people with Gelugpa background, the bliss of the innate mind of Kadasa. So innate mind, but what's it called in English? Clear light. Yeah, innate mind of clear light. Thank you. I just forget the English. Can't find it. So the innate mind of clear light, yeah. And so the innate mind of clear light is imbued with immutable bliss, another dimension of bliss, which is timeless. Because when it says immutable, it doesn't mean it just stopped moving. It just means it's just beyond the whole domain of change. Well, I think you probably see where I'm going. And that is, in our presence for each of us, any one of us here right now, there are these multiple dimensions of our existence. And the surface is what we see. Just that. Oh, that's what Karya looks like. That's what Gache looks like. That's the surface. That could be a painting. It could be a holographic image. It's so superficial, right? But of course, then there's the interiority of each person, and that's where their mind is, their experiences as they're having right now. And then if we go deeper than that, probing into the depths of mind, because I'm passionately committed to understanding mind, then of course we come to the substrate consciousness. And that's already there. That's not something you achieve one day. That's already there. That's kind of like underground water, but it's there. And you can reveal it or not reveal it, but it's there either way. It's obscured by 5 obscurations. But then if you cut through that, then of course what's also already there is Rigpa. And so that's where you are right now. Rigpa is there, substrate consciousness there, your mind is there, body's there. But they're all there at all times, right? So you never can be parted from your substrate consciousness. You can never be parted from Rigpa. The thing you most can't be parted from is Rigpa. You will be parted from the body, that's for sure. And frankly, you'll be parted from your mind, because your mind is arising independent upon the body. Lose the body, bye-bye mind, right? And the substrate consciousness, well, when you achieve enlightenment, you don't have one anymore. So you can be parted from your substrate consciousness. It's conditioned. It's a conditioned samsaric mind. So the only part of you from which you can never, ever, ever, ever be parted is Rigpa. And Rigpa is of the very nature of knowing, so Rigpa can't be Marikpa. Rigpa can't be unknowing, because then it would be Marikpa and not Rigpa. It would be Avidya and not Vidya. So there's a dimension of you right now that is knowing. And it is the knowing on that dimension. Because if it were not knowing, then it would be Avidya, and then it wouldn't be pristine consciousness. It would be pristine unawareness, which doesn't make any sense. So the issue then is this conscious awareness. You remember that. Shirik. And that is conscious awareness. That is not only aware, but from our perspective, from where you live, where each of us live, we are consciously aware of our Rigpa. We've identified Rigpa. We're viewing reality from Rigpa. And in that, there is a dimension of well-being or happiness that is utterly devoid of suffering. In fact, there's never been suffering there. It's never been afflicted. It's never been contaminated. It's all it is. It's timeless. And that's already there. So the point of never being parted from is the Rigpa is already there. Immutable bliss is there someplace. But what is not manifest is our conscious awareness of that Rigpa, and therefore the conscious awareness of this immutable dimension of bliss. And so the question is, since every single sentient being is imbued with Rigpa, imbued with Buddha nature, and that's the deepest ground of each one, and it's of the very nature of bliss, sublime, sacred, one could say divine, ultimate bliss that is by nature devoid of suffering. Since that's already there, then why couldn't, since it's already there, it's kind of like an inheritance you already have. It's not something purchase you make later on, it's something you're born with, right? Since it's there, then why couldn't, since every sentient being is imbued with this, why couldn't each one never be parted from the conscious experience of this sublime well-being, devoid of emptiness, that is rooted in their own being and not something to be achieved later on? And if achieved later on, maybe lost later on. So that's the question. Now when we just take a brief step back, I don't want to linger here a lot, we have some interesting text to get to, but when we just take one step back to the loving-kindness practice, and why couldn't all sentient beings find happiness the causes of happiness, or be endowed with? In that context, as in the immeasurable loving-kindness, I think it's very important to include the hedonic. Why couldn't all sentient beings find the hedonic well-being they need to support them in their practice, having enough to eat, clothing, shelter, and so forth? Why couldn't? So I think loving-kindness really must include. We mustn't be snooty, like pompous, or looking down on hedonia, or like that's for non-Dharma practitioners, or that's for lower people. No, Buddha also ate on a regular basis. You know, the greatest beings, they ate. You know, they did ordinary things. They had clothing, they had shelter. And so in my sense, my interpretation, but I don't think it's very wild, interpretation is the loving kindness really must include where we live, the hedonia, enough. And then of course it goes beyond that to the eudaimonia, genuine well-being, right? But here it comes to this joy, this third one, and he's just focusing in on the deepest. Never be parted from sublime happiness that is devoid by its very nature, devoid of, transcending suffering. And why couldn't we never be parted from that? So there's the question. And then moving right on, may we never be parted. So may we never be parted from that. Which of course, this has to be piggybacking on loving kindness practice, right? Because if the loving kindness practice is aspiring for and resolving to enact all sentient beings finding both hedonia and eudaimonia, that means they've tapped into it. If this aspiration is coming to fruition, the hedonia is there, and on top of that is the eudaimonia. And then the next one, this mudita, is saying, you know that top level? May we never be separated. Maybe we not just dip into it, so not have just a glimpse of Rigpa, a glimpse of Satori, a glimpse of Dhammadhatu or Dhammakaya. Good to get a glimpse. But then may we never be parted from. That's where you need this underlying foundation. If you ask, why couldn't we never be separated? Well, we could if we had Shamatha and Vipashyana supporting it, sustaining it, with bodhicitta, then it could be sustained. There would be no need to ever part from it. So I really look upon this as kind of the bliss of Rigpa, looking at that level, just my interpretation, but the looking at the level of Vidyadhara, who has gained direct, unmediated realization, dwells in Rigpa as a current, a flow. And that's the Vidyadhara's job. Just the job is no job, it's non-meditation. Now don't activate your samsaric mind to try to achieve something. Just remain flowing in that ongoing continuum of resting in Rigpa and observing how all phenomena, every phenomenon, the whole bandwidth of samsara and nirvana and the pure realms, all of these are arising from moment to moment as pure, evenly pure, taknyam, evenly pure displays, effulgences, creative expressions of Rigpa. And you are absolutely in the center of your mandala. And your mandala stretches out through all of space, all of time. Your mandala is the whole universe. And you're seeing, you're just viewing reality. This is where you have open presence in Rigpa. This is where there's just being open. Your vidyata, right? And then you just slip along the stream, to perfect awakening. But my interpretation, for what it's worth, is that this mudita is really focusing on that level, vidyadhara. And having it become vidyadharas, may we never be parted from that bliss, which is free of suffering, never be parted from. And just slip right down the stream to the fourth of the greats, which is then some very big equanimity coming. Not the ordinary kind, supercharged. Well, that's so. So let's hop right to it. Please find a comfortable position. So this afternoon we come to the fourth of the four greats. And before giving just a few comments about it, I'd like to kind of back up to the culmination of the four immeasurables. And you know what that is, this immeasurable equanimity, immeasurable even-heartedness. It's so profound, it's really actually very profound. And we find it again in all of the great wisdom traditions, the great religions of the world, including those. But it struck me in relationship to Martin Buber, the great German and Jewish existentialist philosopher, when he speaks of an I-you relationship, where we engage with another sentient being, for example, another human being, as another subject. That is, we're very vividly aware that there's somebody looking back, that there's a subject there, and that subject is every bit as real as the subject over here. And as much as I care about my own well-being, then so do you. And just being aware of that, just really fully engaging with that reality. So that's an I-you relationship. Without going into the I-thou relationship, we'll show what he highlights as really being a profoundly existential problem. I mean, it's debilitating, it's dehumanizing, it's truly horrid, although it can appear okay, and that is an I-it relationship. An I-it relationship, where we engage with any other sentient being, and again I want to emphasize not just human beings, but when we engage with any sentient being as simply an it, a thing, an object, that we regard as appealing or unappealing, tasty or not tasty, attractive or not attractive, pleasant, unpleasant, and so forth. But basically just saying, well, what's my impression of you, and is it pleasing or not? If I don't, well then I don't like you, or I don't care about you. But if you give me pleasure, then that's good, then I like you, then you're good, you know? This really treating other sentient beings as mere its, as if they had no more sentience, no more subjectivity, no more presence from their own side than a cell phone. And I would say the cell phone has none, any more than a glass of water. Neither one is any more sentient than the other. To think so is living in a fantasy realm. And so, to treat a cell phone as a cell phone, if I want to break it, I break it. It's my business. It's got to be stupid to do that, but it's, it's mine. I do whatever I like with it. But to treat any sentient being as an it is, it's really quite tragic. It's hard to find a word heavy enough. It is utterly tragic to so dehumanize, but that's just for the human, de-animalize. And Descartes did this as a matter of principle. It's astonishing. I find it hard to imagine, but here's this brilliant man, there's just no question, he was highly intelligent. But he said he believed that animals were not conscious. That they merely appeared to be. They don't have emotions, they don't have feelings, they don't have consciousness. He appeared to believe that. And that trajectory actually had quite an impact on the next 400 years of Western science. Jane Goodall, when she started to study chimpanzees, she was a PhD student at Cambridge University. She was told when she began, and this is a brilliant woman, an outstanding university, there's just no question, but she was told by the top experts, chimpanzees don't have emotions. They don't have emotions. Our nearest neighbors don't have emotions. Can you imagine? And this is what I call a massive cognitive deficit disorder. If these people were unintelligent, if they had severe brain damage, then we'd understand. But no, these are very intelligent, highly educated people. And saying chimpanzees have no emotion. Well, 30, 40 years of research has completely demolished that idea. And she took a pivotal role in that. But just very briefly on materialism, because you know my views on it. Not only is it incorrect, but I find it is tragic in the sense we're encouraged to believe that people are bodies. As Antonio Damasio says, a human being is a brain carrying a body on its back. And he says that as if this is quite a decent thing to say. It's a savage thing to say. It is saying that you're not actually a human being at all, you're just a brain. You're a cell phone. You're just a thing. Or, I'll leave this one anonymous, but a philosopher with quite renown, a lot of renown in the United States, I know him quite well, philosopher's mind, he said human beings are animals. There's nothing more to us than we're just animals. We're animals. Well, do you remember what the white people said about the blacks? And some of them still do? They're not really human. They're just animals. And of course, racism manifests in that anti-Semitism. Wherever it crops up, it's cropped up in many places. And I'm not even going to say the words, but we know what they say. We know what they say. It's, here are human beings and here are Jews. Here are human beings, here are Native Americans. Here are human beings, here. The part that is radically other. And the amount of suffering, this simple view, it's just a belief, right? Just a belief. The amount of suffering that's brought in humanity is inconceivable. And now to see it distributed over humanity equally, all human beings are merely animals. Or some will say all are merely robots. Robots are conscious, human beings are robots. Human beings are brains, brains are computers. I think we haven't followed the implications of that, because it's absolutely devastating. Really, absolutely devastating. And so, coming back on a lighter note, but this is one reason I just keep on going around, just launching into this view. It's not just false, it's devastatingly false. Many things are false. The notion that the universe was created in 6 days, that's a silly idea, that's false. But I don't go around beating that one up. Who cares? Who cares? You want to believe that, have a nice day. I don't care. If you believe that, human beings planted the dinosaur bones to trick other people. Okay, that's okay. I've heard that one. I've heard that one. If you believe that, that's fine. I don't want to refute you. I'll just smile. Let's have some tea. Let's not worry about it. But this one, when it's being taken seriously by people at our most prestigious institutions, our most brilliant scientists, some of them advocating this, that really troubles me. That breaks my heart. That's why I keep on talking about it. We come back to equanimity. It's the opposite of that. Just the opposite of that. It's demolishing the I-it relationship towards any sentient being whatsoever. Any sentient being, there's someone gazing back. Someone who is fundamentally like me. And so the beauty of this, now I'm going to be entirely positive, and the beauty of this is that it's not simply a sterile, antiseptic, empty, aloof indifference that is equally distributed to all sentient beings, like equally uncaring. That's equanimity gone astray, right? Aloof indifference, stupid indifference. So that needs to be remedied. But when it's correct, then it's filled with all the preceding. It's filled with loving kindness, filled with compassion, filled with empathetic joy, and equally distributed. And so you're looking through the veneer, the outer appearance of everyone you encounter. And it will be indefinitely true that some animals are cuter than others. Some are more attractive than others. A Cocker Spaniel puppy versus a full-blown alligator. Which would you like to hang out with? It's just going to be, that's the way it is. We're primates. I'd like to hang out with a rattlesnake or a chipmunk. Don't have to think too hard. But it evens all of that. It evens all that into the sheer unconditional open heart. And that's the foundation. That's actually the indispensable foundation for bodhicitta. If you don't have that and you start developing bodhicitta, you're just starting out lopsided, and just sooner or later you have to correct it, but you've started out wrong, right? Because you're developing that bodhicitta for the kind of ones you like, but not so much for the other ones, right? Which is just more attachment and aversion. That's all it is, with a fancy name, bodhicitta, bodhicitta. And so we see with this immeasurable equanimity, we've come right up to, but have not crossed over the threshold into Mahayana. But it's that foundation from which then great compassion, great loving kindness, and so forth can be cultivated authentically and come to full fruition. And then we have the four, and in the sequence that I've laid out, I don't see anything wrong with it, although I've never really seen this, and that is this in a brief conversation with Glenn the other day. Starting out with great compassion, which is clearly the root of the Mahayana. We don't often see great loving kindness highlighted in that fashion. It's mostly compassion. Compassion, compassion, compassion. It's got to be great compassion. So I think there's a good rationale for there to be a sequence there. And I'd like to just play with this briefly. This is totally my interpretation. So I find it useful. Because I just am so, committed living in the field of the notion, the possibility of path, as you know. And so let's just play with this a little bit. Great compassion. Great compassion. You know exactly what it is then. And if we map that onto the path, the Mahayana path, consider this. Consider you're guiding someone. You're guiding someone to the path, And you bring them to the point where they've achieved this immeasurable equanimity, and then you lead them right on, achieving shamatha, developing bodhicitta to the point that it's arising spontaneously, and they're bodhisattva, and then you just seal that with some fundamental insight into impermanence, dukkha, non-self. You seal that with the four applications of mindfulness. And you've guided them so they not only reach the bodhisattva path, but they reach that second stage of the Mahayana path of accumulation, which is now irreversible. Gold-like bodhicitta. Remember, the first one's earth-like bodhicitta. The second one's gold-like bodhicitta, which means they'll never lose it. They'll never lose it. In all their future lifetimes, they'll be bodhisattva, Buddha, but never anything lower than bodhisattva. It's now sealed. If we took the analogy of a doctor with people who had terrible diseases, a whole array of terrible diseases, but you treat them to the point that you're now confident Now just carry on. You're healed. You're not going to have a relapse. Imagine that. Now you're going to be fine. The diagnosis is 100% positive. You had terminal cancer. Now you don't. And you're only going to get better. What would the doctor do? I won't forget about you, but now I can turn my attention to others. And for that person, that person who is now definitely on the road to recovery, or the person who has achieved irreversible bodhicitta, you know you'll never ever just wander around in samsara like a blind man on an open plain. You'll never be there again. You'll always be on the path. What a relief. Yeah? You'll never be a non-bodhisattva. Every life will be meaningful. Now it's guaranteed. Long path, short path, but every life will be good. Shantideva says, what's the big deal about it being a long path? Every life is good, and they just get better. So what's the problem with being a long path? Every life is meaningful. Every life is the life of a bodhisattva. To my mind, I just look at that and I say, oh, that's freedom from suffering and the causes of suffering. Not all of them, but big one. The suffering of having a life with no dharma. Never again. In other words, this one's going to achieve enlightenment. It's irreversible. It's on the path. And you'll never be off the path. So, long recovery, short recovery, but you're taken care of. You're set. Fundamentally, no worries. You're okay. To my mind, you are now, in a very meaningful way, you're now free of a certain broad spectrum of suffering and the causes of suffering. Great compassion. Yeah? So, Mahayana path of accumulation. And then we go to great loving kindness. And then what springs to mind, of course, and the first one must be rooted in shamatha, which of course, when you're resting in shamatha, really you have no blatant suffering at all. I mean, it's blissful, it's luminous and non-conceptual. And you can go there whenever you like. So that's definitely a big step towards freedom from suffering and the causes of suffering. You're fundamentally sane. And on top of that, you have spontaneous bodhicitta. You're really okay now. There's a lot to go. You have all the past to proceed on. But really, you're okay. You're okay. And then when we think of great loving kindness, then what springs to mind, among the three dimensions of eudaimonia, according to the Buddha himself, this authentic well-being. He said there's the authentic well-being, the baseline, the fundamental, the foundational, is the eudaimonia or authentic well-being stemming from ethics. Remember that one? From ethics. Just a sense of well-being that your life is rooted in non-violence and benevolence. There's a level of benevolence. And then above that, there's the eudaimonia, another dimension above that arising from samadhi. There's a bliss born of samadhi. And that is not to be feared, said the Buddha. This is a bliss that is a symptom of a superbly balanced mind. It's a symptom of exceptional mental health and balance. And it's the eudaimonia of samadhi. It's a very wonderful kind of mid-station there. Before proceeding to the third and culminating domain or dimension of authentic well-being, and that is, according to the Buddha himself, it is the genuine well-being arising from wisdom. What St. Augustine called a truth-given joy, the highest eudaimonia, is a truth-given joy. A joy that stems from knowing reality as it is. The bliss that arises from that is just orders of magnitude beyond the bliss of having, the wonderful sanity of shamatha. It's another order of magnitude, And so when I think of then great loving kindness, may you be endowed with the whole spectrum of well-being, including the culminating one of the bliss. And in now straight Mahayana Buddhism, the bliss that arises from Vipashyana is another order of magnitude beyond the bliss that arises from samadhi or shamatha. Yeah, it's another order of magnitude. It's just deeper. It's rooted in reality and not simply temporary sanity, which is really wonderful. But this is rooted in reality. So that's the bliss of the realization of emptiness. That corresponds to the path of preparation. And then we go to mudita, Mahamudrā. May you never be separated from sublime happiness, sublime well-being, devoid of unhappiness. And since the path that has utterly captivated me is the path of Dzogchen, embedded in the Mahayana, embedded in Vajrayana, but it's the path of Dzogchen, then I can't help but think, but we're talking now about the bliss, the immutable bliss of dwelling in Rigpa, which is utterly devoid of suffering and always has been. And may you never stray, never part, may it never fade. Simply dwell in that bliss, and that bliss is your boat that will take you down the stream to perfect enlightenment. But you just rest there. May you never be parted from that. Then I think of Vidyadhara, Mahayana path of seeing on the Dzogchen level, fully ripened Vidyadhara, first level Vidyadhara. May you never be separated. That's bliss, that's really deep bliss. That's immutable bliss of Rigpa itself. Just the way I like to map it. Path of accumulation, path of preparation, path of seeing, Dzogchen style, Vidyadhara, first level of Vidyadhara. And then we come to this afternoon's meditation, and we'll go right to it momentarily now. But this great equanimity, well, I have to give you the liturgy, although you should have it on your computer right now if you wish to. And the Ascension Tamje Niring Chatan Niran Tewe Tanyon Nena Jimarong. Why couldn't all sentient beings dwell in the equanimity, free of attachment to that which is near and aversion to that which is far? That's a nice literal translation. It obviously lends itself to interpretation, because that's all it says. Attachment to that which is near and aversion to that which is far. Well, if we take it from the baseline, the near is my family, my friends, my countrymen, my religious people, and so forth. And then there's the other side, the other people. Different race, different skin color, different religion, different gender, different species. And so then attachment to my side and aversion to other. That's standard. That's what samsaric people do. And so your basic equanimity about now among the four immeasurables is freedom from that. But now let's bring this over to the Mahayana, just for fun. We can still keep it right there if you like. On a very high level, may you be absolutely free. But you've covered that already. That's the fourth immeasurable. Free of any kind of attachment to those who are pleasing, or that you identify my side, and then aversion to those who are not on my side, who might actually be a threat to my side. But let's just kind of up this up to Dzogchen. Why not? It's fun. So what is near for a person who's far along the path? Far along Vidyadhara. It's far along the path. Maybe ventured into the practice of Tutgyal, the direct crossing over, is coming to the culmination of the four visions of Tutgyal. What is near? Well, there's nothing nearer than your own pristine awareness. That's as near as it gets, because that's who you are. That's your core. That's near. What is near is your own being. It's Rigpa. It's Buddha nature. It's your core. It's who you are. It's where you rest. It is your primordial resting place. That's what's near, and it's of the very nature of immutable bliss. And one could imagine one becoming attached to that, right? That pristine awareness is aware of nirvana. It's non-dual from Dhammadhatu. Dhammadhatu is nirvana. So you're dwelling in Rigpa. In dwelling in Rigpa, you're dwelling in nirvana. You're experiencing nirvana, which is emptiness, which is Dhammadhatu. You're experiencing that by way of Rigpa, by way of primordial consciousness. That's just classic Dzogchen, right? That's near. The bliss of realization of emptiness, the immutable bliss of realizing your own Rigpa, that's near, right? What's far? Samsara. All those people wandering around in delusion, thinking, I am, oh, she'll make me happy, oh, he makes me unhappy, and running around, scurrying around, trying to find happiness, ward off suffering, and having so much suffering, basically just in an ocean of suffering. That's far. That's far. Everybody else's reality is far, right? The suffering of samsara is far. The mental afflictions of samsara are far. You in the center of the universe, it's really fine here. But what about reality from other people's perspective? All those around you, people, all sentient beings. What about reality for which they are in the center of their mandala? How's that working out? That's far, because that's someone else. You're fine. You're set. But in all these myriad overlapping mandalas, each sentient being in the center of the mandala, things are not doing so well. And so can you abide in this equanimity, which is devoid of any inclination, any preference, any clinging or grasping to your own place, the nearness of your own pristine awareness, your realization of emptiness, free of all clinging, all grasping, all identification with any kind of grasping whatsoever. Abiding in such an equanimity that there's no attachment, not even any preference for that, and no disinclination, no preference not to be in samsara. Complete even. It's called taknyam, equal purity. It's called rochik, one taste. One taste. Whether you dwell in samsara, you dwell in nirvana, one taste. Because you see both of them, the whole realm of samsara with its whole bandwidth, and then the profound simplicity and primordial purity of nirvana, and you're seeing both samsara and nirvana equally as displays of pristine awareness, and you're resting in pristine awareness. You're resting in a ground that is more primal than samsara or nirvana, because it's a ground of both. And you have such lack of preference that you don't even prefer to dwell in nirvana versus to come out into and be active in samsara. So why couldn't all sentient beings dwell in such equanimity, free of attachment to the near and aversion to the far? Dingo Khyentse Rinpoche, I'm almost certain it's in his Enlightened Courage, but I haven't found it recently. I've not looked at the book, but I read it a long time ago. I'm quite certain he wrote this, quite positive actually. He said as this great Dzogchen master that he was, he says, when an Arya Bodhisattva comes to the end of the path, there's a 10th stage Arya Bodhisattva, right on the cusp of stepping across the threshold into perfect awakening. He said, when you're there at the end of the path, but you're still a Bodhisattva, he said, at that point, you have no preference. You have no preference for nirvana over samsara. And then you slip into non-abiding nirvana of perfect enlightenment, where you're simultaneously, inconceivably, and non-dually present in samsara and nirvana. But the threshold is to have no preference at all. Panchen Rinpoche is going to cite Tapa Khyentsen, one of the great patriarchs, one of the 5 great patriarchs of the Sakya tradition. And I just wanted to remind myself exactly where he fit. He was a third of the great 5. It was Gunga Nyingpo was the first, the founder of the Sakya, then Sonam Tsemo was the second, and then Gunga Nyingpo's son was Tapa Khyentsen. Then I believe his nephew, if I got it correctly, his nephew was Sakya Pandita, and then I believe it was his nephew that was the Pakpa, the great yogi who was a guru for Kublai Khan. So those are the 5. But when I was reading, you can check it on the Sakya website, it was quite interesting. It's a rather long portrayal of Tapa Khyentsen's life, an incredible being. But what kind of leapt out at me as I was reading through it a couple of days ago was that as he was coming to the end of his life, he had these kind of visions that he was, getting an invitation to Sukhavati. Most people you have to apply, but if you're Tapa Khyentsen, you get a special invitation. And his response was, I don't find anything especially appealing about Sukhavati or anything unappealing about samsara. And so not yet. I'm in no hurry. And I think he had requests multiple times. And then, of course, eventually he passed away. So you can think of then this, if you'd like to play with me on this one, mapping the 4 grades on these 5 paths. You can think of this one, this, why couldn't all sentient beings dwell in such equanimity, is like 10th stage Arya Bodhisattva. Such equanimity. They're not quite enlightened yet, but they're right there, whether either way is fine. Totally equal. That, to my mind, is great equanimity. No preference. Oh, that's all. The rest of the liturgy you've already figured out. So let's go practice.